Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara, and Deebo Samuel are a few players that will not be on any of our fantasy squads this upcoming season. We tell you why, plus head on 3 others that we are avoiding on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com, and excited to be talking some potential draft bust today. So we're already on it here for 2024. It's May, but never too early to speak about our draft strategy in fantasy football.
Absolutely. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and I am a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, on Friday, we talked about the guys that we want in every single one of our fantasy teams next year because we just love their value so much. We love what they can potentially do this season. But now we're going to go on the opposite side and get negative here. So we're going to talk about 3 guys each that really we just cannot envision ever being on our fantasy teams this season unless their price were to decrease dramatically by the time we get to, drafting season. But Vinny, let's start with the running back position. What's one running back that you just have no desire to have on your fantasy teams in 2024?
Yeah, he actually finished pretty well last year in terms of his average scoring. He was RB11 in half-point PPR, believe it or not, but he did have a suspension to start the season, and he showed some signs of decline down the stretch. It's Alvin Kamara. I think we've been waiting for the wheels to come off a little bit for him. He's held up pretty well. And I think he was actually helped by the suspension, where he wasn't beat up a little bit more last season. He's always seeming to be battling a minor injury the last few years and sometimes can play through it, sometimes can't. Remember, I think there was a game overseas where we thought he was going to play and then he didn't. So there's all kinds of drama with Alvin Kamara going forward. And then you also have Kendre Miller in this backfield who they want to see a little bit more of. Last year, the Jamal Williams threat wasn't really real, right? I mean, he was there, but he was just a guy, a plotter. He went back to not doing anything of note in fantasy. He got hurt as well. So now you got Kendre Miller. I think this is a legitimate threat. You have a different style of offense coming in, so that doesn't help Alvin Kamara. He's been kind of set here in the offenses, first with Drew Brees and the transition in between, then now with Derek Carr. So it has to start breaking down at some point. This guy has gotten massive volume, not just as a runner, and really the runner has been limited, but he's gotten catches consistently. Remember, he was the guy that caught 81 balls every single year to start his career. So he's got a lot there, and he's breaking down a little bit more. He's had a really good run. He's been one of the better fantasy performers, even had underrated value last season when we were all down on him. But that said, he squeezed out one more year. That says he probably overextended his welcome here in the NFL. So I'm done. I just look at it down the stretch and I see him wearing down and someone that I'm not looking for. And overall, right now, very expensive, 53 on the board. I mean, that's very high, RB17. So I'm just saying no to Alvin Kamara. And I think you'll talk about someone who's a little bit similar in comparison and going a little bit higher.
Yeah, both of our guys are similar. I'm going to hit on Travis Etienne here in a second and why I don't want him on our teams. But with Alvin Kamara, yeah, it just seems like at the end of last year, the Saints were like, okay, we cannot just dump it off to Kamara every 5 seconds. And that was the only reason why he was so good last year for fantasy. It's not like he was scoring a ton of touchdowns. It's not like he was hyper efficient, not even efficient whatsoever, actually. It was just he was like in PPR leagues. This is a big reason why people hate playing in PPR. There's a group of people that hate it because of the Alvin Kamaras, where it's like he's not helping his team at all. He's actually hurting them, but he's getting so many points because he just keeps catching these 3-yard passes. And as soon as they went away from that, you saw the Saints get so much better as an offense, actually start to put up points, win games. So if they're smart, they will stay away from giving Kamara, those 6+ targets a game. He'll still be involved. We'll see if he even is on the team this year. Who knows? I thought he would already be off by now. But yeah, I'm staying away from Kamara as well. Mine is so I brought up Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is going as an RB8. That's just too pricey. Overall 22nd pick on the board right now in terms of ADP when we're looking to project where they'll go in fantasy drafts. But weeks 1 through 8 last season, absolutely amazing. He was on fire. He was the RB2 behind Christian McCaffrey. A lot of that had to do with so many touchdowns that he scored, and he was getting a ton of volume. I still think I'm not worried about him not being the lead back with the Jaguars. He's the lead back. He will get plenty of touches. But the thing is, we saw him break down at the second half of the season because he is a smaller guy. Like I feel like he always just bangs up those ankles, right? He plays through it, but he keeps getting these ankle injuries. And we saw him struggle at the end of last year with his efficiency. Weeks 9 through 18, his points went all the way down from averaging 19 points per game in the first half of the season in half-point PPR, all the way down to 11.4. His rushing attempts went down by a massive chunk. His touchdowns went away, and it's just too inconsistent for me, and he's way too pricey. Like, you have to take him ahead of running backs like Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry. I would much rather those guys, or even other positions like Michael Pittman Jr. or Travis Kelce or one of the top quarterbacks. I just can't envision feeling strongly enough that Travis Etienne is going to be consistent to be in my RB1 spot and feel good about that all year long. So as long as he's this pricey, he's not going to be on any of my teams.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of the things, ankle injuries and things playing through it. I mean, a lot like Alvin Kamara, and he was compared to him quite a bit coming out of Clemson. Well, Kamara was like that Tennessee. They thought that was going to be his key role and be a high receptions guy. The Jaguars, however, have not looked at him in that role as much as we would like. I mean, they give him opportunities to catch the ball, but it's just not a lot of in their offense because they throw shorter passes. And when they do that, they go to Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram more of the time. I mean, Ingram led the team easily in targets last year, yet Kirk get hurt. So he'll be back in the mix. You figure they'll have a few more downfield targets here with Brian Thomas Jr. and really trying to spread it out and try to just push it a little bit more. So same thing might happen where Derek Carr felt comfortable throwing downfield to some of his receivers in the second half, and you saw less of Kamara's usage there. I don't think the Jaguars have any intent there to really force Etienne into the passing game as much as you would like. They just don't have that creativity with their offensive coordinator and their scheme under Doug Peterson. They just don't do that. So it's kind of a boring style of offense. You kind of know it's happening here. And Etienne hasn't been as dynamic, right? He was supposed to be this great change of pace. I mean, first round pick into the first round in the real draft. Yeah, it just hasn't quite lived up to that. So again, he was on that stretch, and I think it kind of peaked when they were in London, and he had that game, I think, against the Bills where, okay, this guy's ripping it off. He's a lead back and he's scoring, and then the usage went down. But part of it was also I don't necessarily trust this entire offense to do what it expected to do because we saw that with Lawrence. We saw that with Calvin Ridley, underwhelming even when he had some big games. Kirk came down to earth with some injuries. Ingram was good, but what was that based on? It was pure volume that Ingram put up those numbers with all those catches and things he had to get. So I don't know if there's a path to the volume we're looking for. And last year, remember, there was some buzz about Tank Bigsby, and he kind of just disappeared. He scored early in the season, then he didn't do anything, and partly because he couldn't pass block and couldn't keep anyone upright. So I think Etienne can do the little things. He's going to stay on the field with Trevor Lawrence. I just don't see the reason to bang the table for this guy and say we're going to draft him at that RB7 or whatever you had him at, right? So many better values at other position.
He's way too touchdown dependent to be going that early. In the 9
It's
games that
weird.
he did,
I didn't think he was going to be touchdown dependent.
yeah, it's because he
might
doesn't
be
get the
receptions
receptions consistently, and then his efficiency on the ground is so bad, so you're not getting all the yards you need.
Yeah.
But in the 9 games he didn't score a touchdown last year, Etienne averaged 8.5 points per game in half PPR. Like, it's completely touchdown or bust for Etienne. And I don't want my RB1 to be in that mold of I need him to score a touchdown to get me any points.
No, I think it was just too rich last year. I think we thought there was some hype, and then he came down. Then I think in the end we were right, not investing too much in Etienne. So I think that's going to be the same thing this year. We'll see if they have to think about a replacement here at some time soon. All right, we'll get into our wide receiver picks here in our next segment. So some good picks there, some juicy picks that we've had here, some names that are really big in fantasy, but maybe not so much in 2024. All right, it's very exciting now in the NBA and NHL playoffs. It's amazing what's going on here. You just had a pretty nice comeback and upset the Dallas Stars took out the Vegas Golden Knights. Yes, the defending Stanley Cup champs are out. Now you got to see if the Denver Nuggets can hold up there in their tough series. So a lot of good things that are coming out of these playoffs, unpredictability. And you want to get in on the action, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own with these playoffs. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more for the playoffs, MLB season, all that good stuff here. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Michelle, we will now get into our wide receivers that we're calling busts, guys we want to avoid in our drafts here this season. You talked about our guy as being a loser of the real draft earlier last week. Now let's confirm he's a guy that we're not touching anywhere. Maybe if he gets traded, but in the state of the 49ers, absolutely not touching him at his value. You can reveal him.
Yeah, so Deebo Samuel's still sitting at wide receiver 14. I'll say even before they used their first round pick on a wide receiver, this would have been way, way too rich for him. He had a couple really great weeks last year. It came in a span where he was finished as a wide receiver 8, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 9 for a 4-week span there around like weeks 10 through 14. That's great. The other weeks, wide receiver 36, 122, 25, 94, 35, 45, 61. So many, like he is either fantastic or absolutely useless. And you cannot have that this early in drafts. And now you also consider the fact that they added Ricky Pearsall in the first round, Jacob Cowing in the fourth, or they haven't traded away Brandon Ayuk. He is still there. It seems like they're going to pay him. They still have George Kittle. They still have CMC who's going to get his targets. There's only been one season that Deebo Samuel has seen over 94 targets, and that was in 2021 with 121 targets. He should have got way more targets that year. And even when he was absolutely amazing and unstoppable, they still didn't get him more targets. He had 89 targets last season. I just don't see how that goes up because he was third on the team in target percentage at 18.9 behind Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. CMC was right there at 17.6%. And then after those four guys, it drops all the way down to 7% to Juwan Jennings. And Juwan Jennings is still on the team, by the way. He's still going to get his 7% target share. And then you have to find now targets for Ricky Pearsall at the very least, if not anybody else. But your first round pick, he has to get some targets or just a complete waste of a draft pick. So maybe it eats into Christian McCaffrey's, maybe it eats into George Kittle's, but I also think it's going to eat into Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk last year only had 104 targets, and he was amazing. He needs more targets too. There's not enough to go around. I do think this team is going to be heavier on the passing game next year, so the passing attempts should go up. Maybe that's where you find the targets for Ricky Pearsall, but I don't think Deebo Samuel are going to go up because his targets have to be manufactured as well, and Kyle Shanahan is so good at doing that. But I don't want to have to count on him doing that when he has all of these other weapons. But wide receiver 14, you're taking him over guys like Nico Collins, Michael Pittman, Cooper Kupp, who I still think could have a nice year, one more good year. Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, like all guys. T. Higgins way down the list. By the way, we need to get T. Higgins cost to increase. It's crazy how low it is. But Deebo Samuel should be below all of those guys I just named, and he's way too pricey right now.
Yeah, I mean, you said all the stuff that fell out from the draft. I mean, no Ayuk trade, getting 2 wide receivers. We also mentioned adding a running back and Isaac Guerrero. They're pretty crowded. So all those touches that he used to get is that hybrid. Oh, he's special. He's going to be the running back. He's going to be the wide receiver. Where all those things have kind of come crashing down to earth here the past few seasons where they've added and maybe they realized, okay, Deebo's going to break down. He's a very valuable player that he can be a game changer. He can take over any game. That's why you see that up and down philosophy. If they want to deploy him and he's the guy that's going to take over the game, he can do that, but you don't know when that's going to happen. I think that's the same frustration you had with George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk. If you manage them, that one day they wouldn't need them. It was just pick your poison here with Kyle Shanahan. The only guy that you knew was going to get the ball everywhere is Christian McCaffrey, week after week after week and scoring. So when your running back is scoring at that high clip, there's not going to be a lot, and especially for a guy that was a hybrid running back when they needed him. So yeah, you're just not going to get any kind of consistency. You get the flash of a few games, and you're sure if he's going to stay healthy. Like if he stayed healthy for a longer stretch, then you're not sure if he's going to do that again. So Debo 100% there with you that you just can't draft him and feel good about it. Now, this guy, I think, is going to get drafted pretty commonly and a little bit down the board. I think he has been adjusted. Wide receiver 21. Right now in the top 40, however, in overall, that's Stephon Diggs. And you'll say, okay, Stephon Diggs, if you peel back and look at the numbers last year with the Bills, his final season with the Bills, he was wide receiver 10 overall. Not bad, right? Wide receiver 1. Then still okay if you look at the average scoring, wide receiver 15. But what if I told you he was irrelevant from the double-digit weeks? I mean, week 10 through week 17, he was all the way down. We know this. If you had him on your team, you experienced this. He was wide receiver 42, and average was even worse. He's wide receiver 57. This is not even close to starting material here. And now you come back, and you're on a team that has less than 50 vacated targets. And a lot of those vacated targets came from the backfield. And you have Joe Mixon coming back to take over the Singletary role, like in the trade. So there's that. And then you've got the same receivers as last year. Dalton Schultz got re-signed, so he's a big part of their offense. Tank Dell, the recovery looks great from his injury, so he should be back. We know Nico Collins is looking to be locked up long-term here, so he's going to be motivated. I don't see Stephon Diggs coming in there and saying, okay, I'm going to command the ball from CJ Stroud. He felt really comfortable with these other guys that he was used to last year in this particular offense as well, and Collins and Schultz and Bobby Slowick back. So Diggs is making a transition to that scheme from what he had last year. Keep in mind, he had to play with Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady last year in Buffalo. So there's another adjustment. This guy turns 31 in November. He was really slow and not effective down the stretch. I think the Texans will run a little bit more as well. I don't see them suddenly passing, going nuts, and saying there's going to be more targets. We're not going to create another 60 to 80 targets for Stephon Diggs and spread them around with Collins and Dell. That's not going to happen. The Texans should be a better overall team. They should be playing from ahead. They would say, okay, we're not going to just pass willy-nilly here. We think we might be able to run the ball. So all kinds of factors. Like, again, he's going with two other great receivers. I don't think there's room if it's going to be a second receiver after Collins comes through. I think it's going to be Dell with his numbers here. And again, you have to worry about Schultz. There's just too much here. And Stephon Diggs, I just don't need to invest in him. It's too much of a crowd. There's not a path to the numbers I'm looking for there as even a wide receiver 2. I'm going to just pass and find some other values there at the position.
Yeah, so much about Stephon Diggs being so good for fantasy with the Bills is he led the league over the last 4 years in targets and receptions since joining the Bills. So without that, he is already going to dip in fantasy points, right? And then I do think his efficiency should increase in this offense because defenses only had to worry about Stephon Diggs last year, honestly. Like they were bracketing him like crazy. It should be way easier for him, but the targets might split in half at that point. Yeah. So it is going to be hard to trust him. Let me ask you some questions here. Would you rather Stephon Diggs or Devonta Smith next year in fantasy?
I think I'm still going Devonta Smith. I just trust him a little bit more. They just paid him. So I think they're going to trust him to make a lot of plays.
Stephon Diggs or T. Higgins?
I think I have to go T. Higgins there. I mean, he's second on his team in a high volume passing offense. We've talked about Joe Burrow. I mean, yeah, I think I have to go Higgins there. I mean, I don't want the third target on the Texans. I mean, maybe 3A, 3B with Schultz.
And one more, because I agree with you on those two. Stephon Diggs or Zay Flowers?
I think I have to go Zay Flowers. We liked him after the draft, and he's got upside. I just don't want to draft a soon-to-be 31-year-old receiver in a crowd of receivers. Like, that's just not going to happen. I want to go with young, upside guys that are guaranteed to be a little bit higher in the target percentage on their team. So, yeah, I mean, this tells you I'm really down on Diggs. I'm going to avoid him and maybe not draft him at all, I guess, at this point, even if his value is lowered.
Yeah, he could even fall a little bit further in the draft. I probably still wouldn't look for him, but he could surprise. We know how talented he is. Maybe he surprises in a great offense. But we're going to get to our quarterback. Each of us are going to name one quarterback that's not going to be on either of our teams. If you've been following me on Twitter, you probably know who I'm going to say because I've been getting a lot of hate for this one. But it'll be fun. We'll get into that in just a moment. I've been told I'm a competitive person by so many people. And yes, I know. I agree. I am. I do have a competitive side. We all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, but now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards show me who is the biggest Monopoly tycoon. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Vinny, who is your one quarterback that you're saying, I don't really want him in any of my fantasy teams in 2024?
Yeah, I think this might be just, I can just roll this over, keep rolling it every year for a while. It's Tua Tagovailoa. And last year, okay, the biggest thing that we thought, okay, the durability issue. He has some upside, but is he going to stay healthy? Then he ended up staying healthy and playing all the games here of note. We didn't see any of their new backup, Mike White, on the field. So when you look at this situation, I mean, it should be higher with the scoring. I mean, yeah, you might say, oh, they just added Odell Beckham Jr., so third weapon here. But the Dolphins, keep in mind, are not the offense you think they are. You think they're just going to be throwing downfield, going nuts, and doing this. I don't think that's really what they want to do. If you look at their use of 12 personnel, they did use a fullback until they moved on there from Alec Ingold. So they have used these type of formations. They're kind of like the 49ers. We know that. They spread the ball around and they're kind of distributed point guard type quarterback system. And to a high degree, I mean, look at the numbers of Brock Purdy and Tua Tagovailoa with their yards per attempt. It's by design. It's to get these guys, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, going after the catch. But here's the problem with him in relation to Brock Purdy. First of all, the weapons are still limited, and Hill and Waddle are it, but you don't necessarily have that consistency there. I don't think Jonnu Smith and OBJ are suddenly going to push the needle toward more production here. And again, he made it through all last year healthy. If you look at the numbers last year, it was QB 15 on the board, actually QB 11 in average scoring. So he kind of finished where you might have expected there. But then you look at there, that was 2 years ago, I should say. Last year was QB 9, but 19th when you look at average scoring. So two very different years, right? Where he was a little bit better average quarterback than he was in production. He was a QB 1 in one sense, 1 year, in a different sense the next year. But he just doesn't have a lot of upside for you. He's at QB 12, so he's ranked where he's expected to be. That's not very exciting, right? If you're just going to go for where the guy's ranked, it's not okay. That tells you no one is enthusiastic about drafting Tua. I guess we'll just throw him here at number 12. That's kind of where he's averaged the last 2 years. But look at some of the names behind him, and you tell me all these guys are going to finish behind him, Michelle. Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Jane Daniels, even Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, and Baker Mayfield. I think I would say that he has as much appeal to me in that group as Baker Mayfield. It just is not that exciting. And Baker Mayfield, similar situation, has two receivers, right? And there's not much else there, and he's not going to give you too much running. So there's no need. I rattled off all those names. Those are guys behind him. You had Brock Purdy ahead of him. Why do you need to invest in this guy? Just avoid this part of the draft with your quarterbacks. Even if you're a two quarterback league, get someone early, get one of these guys later. Don't get Tua in the middle. And that's how I kind of look at it.
I'm not as low on Tua as you are. I think his
Yeah.
price is very fair. And if I'm sitting there that late in the draft and he's sitting there, like I think, and I don't have a quarterback, I am fine with taking him because I think the biggest issue with last year, I mean, we saw him come out pretty strong, right? He was killing it for fantasy, but then Raheem Mostert started stealing all the touchdowns or Etienne, and then Jalen Waddle can't stay healthy to save his life and always banged up. And he needed more weapons. And I'll say, yeah, the Dolphins didn't do everything we wanted them to do. I would have very much liked them to find a tight end better than Jonnu Smith, but he's still an upgrade to what they had last year. Jonnu Smith can still get it done. He's a solid veteran tight end. OBJ, fine. But I did love the Malik Washington pick that they made in the draft. So I do think they have better weapons than they did last year. And maybe the rushing touchdowns aren't as extreme and more of those would turn into passing.
Yeah.
So I don't hate Tua as much as you do, but I get your side. It's boring. You're taking him hoping he's the quarterback 9 again, right? Like that's pretty much his ceiling, quarterback 8, 9. And if you get him as quarterback 14 really late in your drafts and you stocked up at other positions, that might work out for you. But yeah, he's not a guy that I think has like top 3 upside or anything like that. Now, that's also my thing with my guy, Jordan Love. I wanted to say I do not hate Jordan Love in the slightest. I've been messing on Twitter if you've been watching between Jordan Love and Brock Purdy. I think he's a very good quarterback. He surprised me last year as well. Like I thought he performed pretty well. He's currently the quarterback 7 though at price, overall 55. That is way, way too high. So you have your top guys last year. It was Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. They all scored 20 or more fantasy points per game. And then you had Jordan Love at 5, but it was a massive drop off from 20 to 18.7. That's huge in points per game, right? And there was a stretch of guys that all scored within the 18 fantasy points per game range. It was Herbert and Kyler Murray and CJ Stroud and Brock Purdy and Kirk Cousins and Jordan Love. So in that situation, like if you're going to take a quarterback at quarterback 7, that high in the draft, or you're taking him over guys, you have to take Jordan Love over guys like Najee Harris, Jaden Reed, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, like still really, really impact players for your fantasy team. You need him to be that elite quarterback. You just do. You need him to be scoring over those 20 fantasy points per game. And I don't see that for Jordan Love. I know that he was playing with really young guys last year and they should develop and get even better. And I really like Jaden Reed, but he had so many pass attempts last season. He was hyper efficient with the passing touchdowns. Like, that could fall down a little bit, right? Maybe they don't pass as much now that they have Josh Jacobs and they re-signed AJ Dillon and they took Marshawn Lloyd in the draft. Maybe they run a little bit more, or maybe these guys don't take a step up. We don't know, right? But even if Jordan Love does what he did last year, it was still a very up and down year. I mean, for the whole middle half of the year was absolutely brutal. Quarterback 14, 24, 14, 19, 15, 12, 11. I'm sorry, you dropped him by the time he was great. Or you just don't pay attention in fantasy. Like either you don't do waivers or you probably already dropped him, right? Because by the time that was a long stretch of time where he was doing nothing. He had the one big week 1 and all the way up until like week 11, he was doing nothing for fantasy. And then he ended the season on a 3-week great stretch, 100%. But again, like Kyler Murray's going 16 picks later than Jordan Love. At that point already, 16 picks later, you're now picking a quarterback over guys like James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Marquise Brown. That's much easier to swallow, right? Those guys instead of the Najee Harris, Jaden Reed, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin. But then you can get a guy like Brock Purdy, who scored identical fantasy points per game to Love last year on 130 fewer dropbacks. We expect Purdy to be throwing more this year. You can get him 30 picks later, and you're picking Purdy instead of guys like Jalen Warren, Jake Ferguson, Christian Watson. Those are the guys going around Purdy. Like, come on, you tell me what one is the smarter choice to make. It's not. Jordan Love's price is way too high.
Yeah, and let me take you back to a year. And while you were talking, I wanted to do some research, and that's what I was doing here. And I'm going back to the first year that Matt LaFleur was the coach. And it was a very disappointing season for Aaron Rodgers. What happened that season? We had a ton of touchdowns from Aaron Jones. So this could happen again. And I think the Packers are a better overall team. I think in the end, the heart of the Packers is wanting to defense and run the ball. And that's how they want to win a lot of games. That's not to say they're going to get conservative and kind of reel back their quarterback, but I think there's a real chance for the touchdown regression. I think that's the number one thing you look at. Again, you add Jacobs, you add Lloyd, Dillon is still a pretty good red zone scorer. So you got those 3 guys that can finish drives for you. The running game should be better. I mean, I think their pass protection may have gotten a little bit weaker, but I think they're a little bit better in run blocking now. So I think now you have a back in Jacobs that can handle the volume. So you might see less efficiency in terms of downfield passing. You might have a few more checkdowns there. And Jacobs is probably going to be a good bet, even with the other backs here, to have double-digit scores. So I'm not saying he's going to have Aaron Jones like near 20 scores like we saw in 2019, but I think it's going to throw back a little bit to what the Packers did then. And the numbers really exploded here for Rodgers last few years before he left, and then Love in his first season as a starter. But I think, yeah, there's no reason to get into a hyped player. Now, Tua, a little bit different reason, like his ceiling isn't high. Here, I think there's going to be a lot of hype over Jordan Love's ceiling, and that's going to push his price way up. Too much and he's the Packers. You can't hide that player, right? I mean, unfortunately, he's just on a team where his value is going to be driven way up. I mean, everyone knows what team he's on, and that doesn't really help him become a value in the draft. And I think that's something that also comes into play, the name, and I think that's happening to CJ Stroud to some degree. I wouldn't say I'm going to avoid Stroud or Love totally, but the name, the hype has been there, right? With the Texans and what's going on with that team. There's a lot of them. But then when you look, Aaron Rodgers, he's down there under the radar. The Jets don't have as much hype. He actually might be a better value. So that's the thing is quarterback, you can avoid a lot of people. If you're even in a 2 QB super flex league, avoid a lot of people, especially in a 1 QB league. You got options. You got everyone. There's going to be someone down there at the bottom of the list that's going to give you value. So try to avoid these certain kind of trap areas. And I think where Love is and where Tua is are some of those, like mid-tier to bottom tier QB ones.
Yeah, I'll say, like, if you want the upside that the Stroud and the Love gives you, just take Dak Prescott or Kyler Murray.
There
A
you
few
go.
rounds later, like, we know for sure they have the upside because we've seen it multiple years now. We haven't seen the top 3 fantasy finishes from Love or Stroud yet. Not to say they can't do it, but we already know Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott can, and they're only going later because they're a boring vet, right? Instead of the
Yeah.
shiny new weapon. So just be smart about your draft picks. That's it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, we're going to be back tomorrow with a fun little concept. We're going to be talking about fantasy players that are kind of like the middle child. Nobody ever talks about them. No one's speculating about them, but we're going to talk about them because they deserve it. So don't miss that show. That'll be tomorrow. Thank you all again. Bye, y'all.